The deeper dimensions of the Parsha. So first of all, as far as I know, there is no word in the Bible or even in rabbinic literature for revelation. This moment is referred to in rabbinic literature is Ma'amad Har Sinai, standing at Mount Sinai. And the rabbis assume that you've read this and you know what it means. But I think the ancient rabbis also assume that you don't know what it means by the Haftarah, the prophetic portion that they have chosen for this Torah portion. So you know that we have the Parsha, and then the rabbis, the ancient rabbis of blessed memory, we say Zichronam Levracha. They chose a prophetic portion to go with each Torah portion, and sometimes there's an obvious connection, and sometimes the connection is a bit of a stretch. And the stretch, it actually is midrash, meaning an interpretation of the Torah portion, telling us what they think is happening in the Torah portion. So most of you know that the Haftarah, the prophetic portion for the Torah portion in which we have Ma'amad Har Sinai, the event at Mount Sinai, is from the book of Isaiah, chapter 6. So what happens in Isaiah chapter 6? Isaiah is in the temple in Jerusalem. He looks above. The heavens have opened up. He sees the Seraphim, the Chayot HaKodesh. He sees the fiery angels and divine beings circling the divine throne, saying, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Now, the revelation, and I will say this is a revealing to Yeshayahu, chapter 6, and then also to Ezekiel, in Ezekiel chapter 1 and chapter 10. You really ought to take a look at them because they are extraordinary evidence of mystical visions in the Bible. The two most extraordinary evidence moments of mystical revelation in the Bible, Isaiah 6, Ezekiel 1 and 10. Now, during rabbinic times, the vision of Isaiah and the vision of Ezekiel turned into an entire literature that goes under the rubric Second Temple mysticism. It's discussed in the Mishnah and the Talmud, although when it's discussed in the Mishnah and the Talmud, we don't know what they're talking about. They give us words, but the texts were not preserved in the official Jewish canon. They called it Ma'aseh Bereshit, the work of creation, Ma'aseh Merkavah, the work of the chariot, and they also talked about the Hechalot, the hymns of the palace. So we have evidence of it, by the way, in our prayer book, in our Shabbat and festival morning service. There are, as it were, a residue of Merkavah and Hechalot, chariot and palace hymns. But the texts weren't recovered until the beginning of the 17, 18, 1900s, and especially in the 1900s and early 1900s, early 20th century, when scholars began to recover great archives, both in the Geniza in Cairo. There was an attic in the great synagogue of Cairo where manuscripts, instead of being disposed of, were just put in the attic. Solomon Schechter went up there and cataloged them and found amazing, amazing treasures. People found incredible textual traditions in Ethiopia, in Slavic countries, in the Vatican. And in the early 20th century, scholars were able to put together the Merkavah, the chariot, the Hechalot, the ascents into the divine palace, and Ma'aseh Bereshit, the mysteries of creation. So we know more about these texts in the 18 and 1900s than we've known about for most of Jewish history. So what do these texts tell us? The upper world is alive with angels, divine forces, this mystery of Metatron, the divine who exists not on the divine throne, but beyond the divine throne. If you look in the mystical literature, there's something called Sar HaTorah, the Prince of Torah. So when you read, for example, the book of Enoch, E-N-O-C-H, and others, it's really, truly a mind-blowing, fascinating, complex world that the ancient rabbis inhabited. So they lived in a world where this world is a paltry, opaque image of a higher world. Now, this goes along very well with, as I'm teaching in my Tuesday night class, something of an Aristotelian view of language and became a Maimonidean view of language. I'll share it with you. I hope you don't take offense. But Maimonides, when he studied Torah and he had a metaphysical understanding of God, that God has no dimensions, God cannot take up space, therefore God can't, as it were, move from one space to another. God has no vocal cords, God has no voice, God has no language. So when Maimonides, following Aristotle and Plato, would think about God, the Bible did not align with the belief in God. Now, Maimonides, by the way, inherits this firmly from the Islamic tradition. The Islam came in direct confrontation with Aristotle. You read Aristotle when Aristotle was translated from Greek into Arabic. And, if you want to study with me on Tuesday night and look at the Nicomachean Ethics, it's profound, it's deep, it's nuanced, and I don't think it's a full account of human moral consciousness, but it's never been equaled. I mean, I'll show on Tuesday night where I differ, and I'll share that with you as we go along as well. But there's nothing as elegant and as profound. And Aristotle looks at what people believe, and he basically says something like, people can't handle the truth. The myths, the metaphors, they're for people that don't want to think too deeply about ultimate reality. And it's a placeholder for them. That there's some kind of divine world, we have our moral responsibilities, and they don't want to go into the nuances and the complexities that you find not only in the Nicomachean Ethics that we're studying on Tuesday night, but also the metaphysics and so forth. It's just beyond, it really is beyond the untrained person. So Maimonides comes along and says, what you read in the Torah is not what's in the mind of God. What you read in the Torah is, as it were, what the tradition delivers over to people who really don't want to think too complexly. It's a placeholder. They're going to be observant, moral people. That's all most people want to do. What do I have to do? What's the moral law? How do I keep Shabbos? That's enough. But Maimonides says, the deeper you move into biblical language, you start to see not only its metaphoric dimension, but you might say its layered dimension. So this is both if you're informed about ancient Greek philosophy, there's a mix here of Aristotelianism and Platonism. So try to imagine that when you read the Ten Commandments, as inspiring as they are, it's not at all what God had in mind. It's just enough to keep a person who just wants to know, what do I do? What do I not do? Keep it simple. I'm good to go. And that's what Maimonides says is most people. But Maimonides was dealing with people in his time who had read Aristotle and read Torah, and they were perplexed. They didn't know how to square Aristotle with Torah. So Maimonides, by the way, is firmly within the milieu of Islamic philosophy. You can look up Al-Finley and Al-Ghazali, Al-Farabi, Ibn Rushd, called Averroes, for a reason I don't understand. But Ibn Rushd, or Averroes, was actually a contemporary of Maimonides and also lived in Andalusia, or in Spain. So scholars have debated, how much did they influence him? And I've asked myself, did he meet Ibn Rushd? And when you study the thought of Al-Ghazali and Ibn Rushd and Maimonides, you have a sense they were studying in the same classroom and some metaphoric way, even writing their books together at the same time. So I want to give you a kind of a practical example. So remember, the rabbis picked the Haftorah of Isaiah to share with us that whatever we think was said at Mount Sinai, it's only a placeholder for people who just want to know what to do, what not to do. Keep it simple. But for those of a more mystical consciousness, there's much more to be known. The question is how to know it. The question is, what does it mean? And in Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed, that's the journey he wants to take people on. To go beyond the Peshat, to go beyond the simple meaning of it, meaning the Ten Commandments don't mean what they say. They mean enough, but not the deepest meanings of the serious spiritual seeker. So I want to give you a tiny example. My Shabbat thought today, when I thought about the kind of the essence of Torah, and I quoted the end of Eshet Chayil, Proverbs chapter 31, and it says, the law of kindness is on her lips, the law of kindness. So I want to give you an imaginary counseling session. I'm talking to a couple of people, and they're not being nice to each other. And I get somebody's attention, and I say, I want you to be kind. The person says, yeah, okay, I'm sorry. I said, no, I want you to listen very carefully. I want you to be kind. They say, okay, I'll be kind. It's a good answer. But I want you to be kind. I want you to be kind to other people. I might explain the word chesed. And I want you to feel remorse for every time you have not been kind. I want you to feel remorse for your entire life. Start in this relationship. Every time you have not been kind. So at some level, Kabbalistically, chesed is behind everything. And try to imagine a person hears it and realizes something that our tradition says. The light of God is the human soul. You're not talking to a person you're frustrated with. You're talking to a neshama. You're talking to a spirit. You're talking to a light of God. And you say to yourself, how dare I talk that way to an instantiation of the divine light? And it goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And suddenly you realize that when someone says, be kind, there are so many deep dimensions to it that you might realize, as I have when I study these texts. I've never understood what these texts meant until I stayed in the Hasidic practice of picking a holy word and stripping it one layer after the next, deeper and deeper and deeper. And as you take a word deeper and deeper and deeper, you discover new levels of yourself. You discover new levels of your own resistance. So then when you look at terms such as don't murder, rabbis say, don't take away someone's self-dignity. Don't rob them of their humanity. Don't injure their spirit. Don't defame. Don't belabel. No lashon hara, but seriously, no lashon hara. Seriously, no lashon hara. So try to imagine you take the word "don't murder." Say, "Yeah, I haven't murdered anybody." I'll share an anecdote I've shared many times. I got to be famous in LA many years ago. I ran a minyan up at Stephen White's Temple, and every year we had, by the way, double services at high holidays, Rosh Hashanah Eve morning, Yom Kippur Eve morning. About 2,000 people at every service. So in a given high holidays, I guess I spoke to about 8,000 people. We all did. And I pushed my morning minyan, from which Oratora derived. And so everywhere I went in town, I bumped into someone who had been at one of these services. I'd walk into an auto shop, or I'd walk into a carpet store, and people say, "Oh, Rabbi Finley." And I'd say, "Yeah, nice to see you." And they would say, I heard about your minyan. It sounds great. I'm just not I just don't go to Saturday service. I said, that's fine. You don't feel guilty. It's all good. And they say, I'm not a very observant Jew, but I'm a good person. Now, I would privately think to myself, wow, because I actually don't know that many good people. I know people who aspire to be good, but like someone who's actually gotten there, like that's their adjective. I don't say this, but I'm thinking to myself, that's pretty wonderful. And they say, and I follow the 10 Commandments. I say, okay. I say, you keep the Sabbath? They say, are you sure that's in there? I say, I'm pretty sure it's in there. Okay, so like 9 out of 10. Okay, so do you covet? Do you desire things that belong to other people? That sounds kind of Christian. I say, I'm pretty sure it's in there. Okay, so like 8 out of 10. I said maybe 7, but that's still a C plus, so good to go. So people walk around with this sense, I'm a good person. I got a C plus on the 10 Commandments. Actually, I'm going to give them a 6 out of 10 because I don't think they have any idea what it means to not put any gods before God. And God means, what's the most serious thing in your life that you care about? Honestly, it's probably not God. So we're going to take that one out. Taking God's name in vain. Most people don't get a perfect score there. And most folks don't have any conception of what it means that when you truly, deeply ingest, God took us out of the house of bondage. It's still happening every day. But a person says they observe the 10 Commandments, I'll say, well, maybe not exactly, but think about that. Think about a person who says, yeah, I'm a good person. Wow, they're done. And I observe the 10 Commandments. I've studied. I think to myself, probably not, but okay, I'll buy it. And what's the likelihood of deep personal growth and transformation for a person who says, I'm a good person, and observe the 10 Commandments, even though I don't know what they are, and I've never thought about them very deeply? Just pause there. So remember, I'm coming at this from a position of rabbinic mysticism. I'm coming at this from a position of Kabbalah, of Hasidut, where every one of these words exists as a force on the granite of consciousness and trickles down and breaks through to the living waters below. But it's a painful, arduous task to break through into the waters below. And when you break through to the waters below, there's no revelation we can articulate there. It's poetry. It's a music we tune into. It's just fragments that flow up into our lives, and we do the best we can to be broken by the mystery, called to the mystery, try not to forget there's a mystery, and then find every morning we find ourselves forgetting. So I want to share with you, when we look at the Aseret HaDibrot, I'll talk more about that strange term tomorrow, but I want to give you a sense of, Maimonides would say, you think you know what it means, that's okay. You want to know what to do, what not to do, you're good to go. But if you actually want to take these words and use them to pierce into divine consciousness and find just fragments there that you will have to put together, or using a different metaphor, to pierce through the granite of your resistance and your defiance and break into the living waters, and there just hear the music and recover a few fragments and come up to consciousness. You can either take the Maimonidean approach or the Hasidic approach. And when I'm restudying Maimonides again, as I'm starting with Aristotle, going through to Maimonides, every day I study a Hasidic literature. I want to share with you an anecdote. I was studying with my international student this morning, as I do every Friday morning, and talk about a little bit about Maimonides, and the person said, so who's the equal of Maimonides today? Who's the one that, when you study, they've broken new ground? So I said, you mean by consensus or for me? Because, I guess I can scout around and try to think what everybody else thinks. I said, or I could give you my personal answer, who's my equal to Maimonides? And he said, okay, so I want to hear for you. So just before we got online, I was studying Sfat Emet, as you can imagine, my go-to Hasidic Rabbi. I think he's my Rabbi. He died in 1905. He's still my Rabbi. And so I brought up the book and I said, this one. If I live my life right and can get the word out, the Sfat Emet will be the Maimonides of the next 1,000 years. I don't think I'll be able to persuade people. But when I read Sfat Emet, who I think is the greatest Hasidic teacher, and I think Hasidism is the greatest teaching of our time, it's transformative and deep and kind of rips the soul apart and sews it back together. Well, I said, this is it for me. So I want to offer to you a Second Temple mystical understanding of the words of the Bible is poetry to be, as it were, pierced, not words to understand at their simple level. Understand it from rabbinic midrashic level, that the Torah is the blueprint of the universe. And Kabbalah says anybody who reads the Torah and interprets the bottle for the wine, may their bones be crushed, because you will not understand what Torah says if you look at the earthly form, meaning the words of the Bible. Kabbalah was very disturbed that people would read the body and not read the soul. You go to the Hasidic world and you study the Maimonidean perspective rooted in Islamic philosophy and rooted in Aristotle. It's vast. It's vast. So I wanted to share that with you for those of you who are maybe going to look at our Parsha tonight. Feel free to maybe look up the relevant sections in the Guide for the Perplexed. I believe it's online. You can just put Revelation and Prophecy in Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed. You're going to be suffused with some wonderful articles. You can read maybe one or two. You'll be impressed and touched and moved. You can look at Revelation from a Hasidic perspective. Okay? Make room for a few good words. But Revelation in rabbinic midrash, be prepared to, have all your inner bells rung in the most incredible ethereal music. So it's my challenge to all of you. Is the biblical story is fantastic. I'll say the exoteric midrash is amazing, but there's an esoteric dimension that's waiting for every one of you.